Hello, hello, and welcome back to. I am forgetting the name of our own ship. It's the Lame Video Live. It has been a morning, y'all. Um, welcome back to the show where we tell you about all things video marketing and have a fun time while doing it. I am Jenny Wadier, your podcasting expert, and with me is
I
Marie
am
White,
Josh
visibility strategist, and
Josh, the YouTube marketing expert.
Yep. So today I am particularly excited because, as you can see, I am hosting, but also we are talking about something that a lot of people struggle with, which is podcast interviews. Now, we know that podcast interviews is a great way to grow your following, whether you're hosting interviews or giving interviews on someone else's show, but it can be really nerve wracking. And it can be really hard to give like a really great interview. But there are things you can do on both sides to prepare for that, to really make everything run smoothly and just have a great time. So,
Yeah, this is definitely an important topic because we help a lot of people with podcasting, and one of the things that is just very common is how the interview aspect of podcasting is something that's very widely known, and it works really well to get other experts onto your podcast. But a lot of people struggle with the fear of, like, well, what am I going to say? How can I lead the conversation? How can I make sure that everyone looks good coming out of this and that this is actually something that's entertaining? Because it's a lot easier to script out something that you read that's entertaining than have a conversation that is entertaining. But
well,
I'm excited to see what tips you have for that.
yeah, I don't know if anybody else does this, surely not, but I tend to overthink things, especially ahead of time. So when I'm getting ready to do an interview or whatever, my head is usually spinning with some things, am I going to know what to say? Are they going to ask a question I'm not prepped for? Or if I'm giving an interview, the same thing. Are we going to, are there going to be those awkward, quiet moments, which are fine because you can deal with them in editing, but still, you just wanted to. Truth is, the more you do ahead of time, and I'm sure maybe you're going to, I don't know what you're touching on, but the more you can do ahead of time, the more you can do away with all of those roadblocks and fears in your own thoughts and just let yourself enjoy the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
are we freezing? We lost Jenny.
Oh, no.
That's
All right.
let's talk about it.
Yeah. All righty.
I don't know why it decided to freeze up on me, but you know what? Work with the technical difficulties today. I am back. We're going to dive into it. Yeah. So what I really want to talk about today is how you can prepare beforehand to make sure that you have everything you need to really show up without those distractions, without those fears, and just be present in the conversation and ready to have a great talk.
Awesome.
So, and I've got some points again for both sides. For the hosts, I got some points for the guests. So whichever one you are, if you're both, you'll benefit a whole lot from this. So we're going to start off on the guesting side. So if you're guesting on a podcast, what would y'all think of as the first thing you have to get ready if you're going to be guesting on a podcast?
Check out their show.
Yeah, same thing. Look at the episodes that they already have, because that it not only helps you get a sense of of the person that you're going to be talking with, but it also helps you get a sense of the pacing of the show, what things are expected of people who come on the show.
Yep.
If you're wanting to give an offer, you can see, well, what kind of offers do they allow people to give on this show? Things like that. Just taking a little bit of time to look at a couple past episodes will give you a lot of information about what you're going to be walking into when you get on the show.
And just understanding their vibe, how do they feel? And maybe that's I'm more of a feeling person, but how does it feel on their show? What kind of dynamic do they have when they're talking with their guests and stuff like that? Can just really make me feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes into one of the first talking points that I have, which is you got to find the right show. You can't just guest on any show and expect, like, sure, you might get some people following you, but are they the people you really want? Are you just padding your audience with people that's never going to actually be interested in what you do or buying from you? So finding the right show is like a big first thing. And so, yeah, doing stuff like looking at previous episodes is really big. You can looking at their website, looking at their social media, that kind of stuff to find out like what's their main topic, what's their interview style, what values do they have, like do they value similar things to you. Is there something you can do to actually help their audience, or is their audience not someone who's going to benefit from the things that you're doing? All that kind of stuff is really important to ask when finding the right show that will actually that has an audience that will actually be interested in coming over and following you as well.
Yeah, because you want to be a benefit. Plus, I'm sorry, you want to be a benefit to their show as well, to their audience, as well as finding an audience that's interested in what you're doing. So it really isn't going to go well for your host if you come on there and share something that their audience doesn't need, and really they should make sure that you're somebody their audience needs and wants to hear from too. So it's both sides.
And it's also going to make the the interview itself a lot easier if you find a host that matches with your style of speaking. If you are someone who is very informational and teaching, you may not want to go onto a podcast that is very relaxed and just conversational. You probably would do fine, but it's going to be uncomfortable for you because that's not what you're used to. But if you go to a podcast that is about information and teaching, and instead of the interviewer just asking you about how your life has been, they ask you, okay, what are your thoughts about this? How would you solve this problem? Then that would fit into your style very well. So taking some time to look at it ahead of time not only makes sure that your right audience is there, but it also makes sure that you and the host are matched well so that it's easy to have a good conversation with them.
Exactly. And some people, as much as I am very much a person that I would like to be a friend to everybody, but some people's personalities just clash. So, and the worst thing is get into an interview and then realize, oh my God, I really don't like this person that's interviewing me. So that's another reason why it's important to look ahead of time at the show, at the host, and figure out. And the same goes in reverse, but for hosts, the guests that you're bringing onto the show, you need to make sure that these are the people you want to be talking to, that they have some sort of unique perspective that they can give, or unique experience, and that it's somebody that your audience will find interesting or that has something that can help your audience. So it's also on the host in that way to make sure that the guest is a good fit for the show.
Yeah.
Yep. Also, a great thing to do to get rid of some of that feeling of like, oh my God, what are we going to say? What are we going to do? Have your topics ready ahead of time and talk to the host about them. And talk to your guests about the stuff ahead of time. And this could be like emails back and forth or an actual call you get on. But I suggest having a conversation before you get on the podcast to be like, okay, like hosts to be like, okay, this is the style of podcast. I typically like my guests to talk like this, short answers, long answers. I might ask you these questions as we're going through your speaking points. So be prepared for those. And guests too, you can come and be like, hey, this is my preferred speaking points, and here's like 5 or 6 sub questions that you can ask to steer the conversation however you want. So that kind of communication is really good at getting rid of all of those nerves and being like, okay, we have a plan. This is what we're going to do.
And I'm all for automating all of that stuff ahead of time. And I know, it's what we do for our clients, but having, questionnaires that get filled out ahead of time, like what 3 questions would you like to be answered? What are your favorite points to touch on, when you're talking about those questions? Just things like that. Just communication, just talk. But it really can be automated because nobody has time to do 3 preparatory calls before a podcast, recording. So you don't want to take up a lot of anyone's time, but just some time of communicating ahead of time It can be on a Google form, whatever, or in an email. Just making sure you communicate that stuff ahead of time. I think is cool.
Yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
this is really important because one thing that a lot of people in podcasting don't realize is that whether you are the podcast interviewer or the podcast interviewee, the odds are the other person has just as little information about you as you do, and is in often cases just as nervous as you are because they don't I'm unless like you're really close friends and you go on their podcast, they don't know you very well, they haven't talked to you very much, they're just going onto this podcast seeing how this is going to go. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you can come in the beginning and outline some things and say, hey, here's some more information on who I am, what I do, what I talk about, and what I really know about. Here's the things I can really help your audience with. Then, if you are a guest, that helps the podcast host that you're going to because now they know, okay, I now know where you can give the most value to my audience. So now I know where to
Mm-hmm.
steer the conversation so that we go in that direction. So it just helps both parties out by alleviating worries and making sure that the actual content you get into is the most valuable content that you can.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that you have to stay like hyper focused on a set of questions so that
Yeah,
you're not
no.
really enjoying the flow. I've seen that happen too. You don't want to be somebody that is just ask a question and then all you're thinking about as a host is the next question. You're not even hearing what the
Mm-hmm.
guest is saying. It's going to be a boring show. So it needs
Yeah.
to be a real conversation where you're really enjoying it. So let that be your guide. But shoot, if it takes off another direction and you're both really enjoying it, yeah, go for
Mm-hmm.
it. Go off script and enjoy it. And then just have those points ready to come back to when you need to find something next, the next thing.
Yeah, exactly. Those points are just like your guidelines. But, and here's a thing that I don't hear people talking about a whole lot. Don't be afraid as as the host to interrupt your guest if they say something really interesting that you think your audience would be really interested in. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're answering one of your questions and they just happen to throw in something and you're like, oh wait, let's talk about that. Don't be afraid to say like, hold on. You just said something interesting there. Can we dive into that a little bit? Because that kind of stuff is going to like it interrupts the monotony of it a little bit, and it also you can really find like some really good nuggets in there if
Yeah.
you're like going a little bit off script and being like, wait, that was really interesting. Let's do that. Because as a host, you know your audience best. So yes, you could
Mm-hmm.
have this thing laid out ahead of time, but if you find something that you think your audience would genuinely be interested in that conversation, don't be afraid to steer it away a little bit. That's just kind of the guidelines so that you know the general flow of the conversation.
Yeah, as the host, your responsibility is to steer the conversation wherever you think it needs to go to create the
Mm-hmm.
best experience for your audience. And
Exactly.
people who come onto your podcast understand that. And oftentimes, people who come onto your podcast appreciate that because it,
Mm-hmm.
once again, it alleviates pressure from them because they no longer have to try and figure out where they're going with this. They just have to go along with the pathway that you're laying out. So if you are the host, make sure that you're listening to them clearly. And
Mm-hmm.
when they do say something that you're like, oh, that's a good path, that's somewhere where we need to go, lead them down that path. And if you're a guest, be willing to be led by them, be willing to be brought to the place that they know will be the best for their audience. Because again, that's just going to create the best results for their audience, which in
Mm-hmm.
turn will lead more people back to you.
And will oftentimes bring up questions that you're not often asked on podcasts. If you're going to a bunch of podcasts interviews with the same topics over and over, you're probably giving the same answers over and over. So if you let the host lead you where they want the conversation to go, it could lead to really interesting things coming up and questions that you don't typically get asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, just think about it. If you flub the whole thing and you stumble and you fall, the worst thing that happens is the editor is going to cut out something. I mean,
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
no harm, no foul. I mean, if you're on a live show like this, even so, if you mess up something, so what? Keep going. But yeah, enjoy it. Enjoy the flow. Get in the flow and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the flow. So prep as much as you can to make yourself not nervous, and then get in the flow.
Yep. And going back to what we said a minute ago about alleviating some of the pressure and the worry off of the guest, a great way to do that, that again, I don't hear a whole ton of people talking about, is before you get into the interview, go ahead and gather up all their information, their bio, their links, whatever it is they're going to be promoting, and write like a 30-second to 1 minute intro for them. And like a really killer, like take your time to write something that really hypes them up, talks about all the cool stuff that they've done, and talks about their product or their freebie or whatever it is they're promoting on your show. And read this out loud in front of the guest. Now, again, this is something you can re-record later if you need to, but read it out loud in front of the guest before you start the interview. Because now the guest is like, oh, well, they've already said everything about me. They've already said everything about what I'm promoting. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Mhm.
I can just sit here and have a conversation now. So that's a really great way to not only get your audience interested, because now they're like, ooh, oh, wait, this person has done all this. Oh, wait, this person is doing this thing. That's really cool. Let me listen. But it also puts your guests at ease because they're like, oh, all my promoting's done. I can just talk now.
Well,
Yeah.
and you can also take that a step further in that let your guest write that for you. The guest probably already has a way that they like to be introduced.
Mm-hmm.
If people have been speaking very long, they have their little blurb that's how they want to be introduced. You know, what name they want to be called, what business they want to have listed, what accolades they want, mentioned, and how they want their company introduced. And I mean, they probably already have that created. And if not, as a guest, that's one of the biggest things you can do is go ahead and create that. Your little bio, your little introduction and bio, and have that ready, because a lot of people's forms when you're getting ready to be on their show ask for that. And that, I mean, it's for that reason. It helps the host be ready to introduce them. So yeah, the host will tweak that usually. Usually the host is going to take what you say and maybe add a little bit of their spin to it, but still makes it easy on both sides if you have that ready.
Yeah. All right, and another big thing that I say to go ahead and talk about beforehand to get some of the pressure off of the show, off of like both sides, is talking about all things promotion before the interview happens.
Yeah.
And by that, I'm talking like talk about what they are going to promote on your show, like what kind of things you allow people to promote on your show. Talk about how both sides are going to promote the episode when it comes out. Talk about like all things around promotion. Just go ahead and get that out of the way beforehand, because that way you both kind of have a plan and you're like, okay, even down to things like when in the show you're going to be talking about the thing that your guest is promoting. So like in the intro, if they're going to do a mid-roll, if it's going to be at the end, if it's how, like, do they want their site talked about? Do they want their social media talked about? Is there a book or a project or a whatever it is? Just another thing to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
And again, and maybe it's just because I have such an ops brain, but I'm just thinking process wise, that should all be taken care of ahead of time with the intake form. Because you probably want eyes on what they're wanting to promote before you actually let them promote it. So let them go ahead and send the link to what they're going to promote, a little description about it, and then you go ahead and tell them ahead of time. A guest sheet for your guest is one of the best things you can do as a host.
Yeah.
Is give them a sheet that just outlines, my show is like this. I usually, I do this. I'm going to introduce you, please give me the bio that you want, but just describe, I will promote your product at this point in my show. We're going to end the show by doing this. Like, just go ahead and break it down for them, your preferred format ahead of time, so they know exactly what they're expecting. And then in their intake form, let them do the same thing, give you all of their, the product information, how they want that described, any of that kind of stuff ahead of time. The link, because you're going to want to have that link ready for your team. With the episode, you don't want to have to be following up later saying, hey, can I actually get the link to that thing that you shared on my show? And because I want to make sure and put it in the description when we, no, you don't want to do that. You could just build such structure around this to where everything we're saying needs to happen can just become automated, so that you can really just enjoy the process. So.
And a lot
Yeah.
of people do. A lot of people have whole processes built around guesting and hosting because, again, it makes it super easy. Because really, all of this that I'm talking about today boils down to communication, having clear communication on all of these parts with both sides, the host and the guests. What were you saying, Josh?
Yeah, it all comes down, like, I believe that one of the biggest reasons of why people are afraid to speak on podcasts or to bring people onto their podcasts is just because they're not sure how it's going to go. If you knew 100% certain that everything was going to be fine and it was going to be a great show, then you wouldn't be worried about it. But the problem is that a lot of people are worried about, well, I don't know what they're going to talk about. I don't know how they're going to talk. I don't know how fast things are going to go. I don't know what they're going to ask of me. Am I going to have the answers that I need for that? I don't know how we're going to market this. All of it comes down to I don't know enough information to feel comfortable doing this.
Exactly.
So if you take the time to figure out all of that information beforehand, then the majority of that fear goes away, because all of those things that were clouding your mind and making you afraid, you now have a clear answer for. Well, I don't know what they're going to be like. Oh, I've watched them talk in 5 episodes to this point. I know how they talk. I don't know how fast it's going to go. Well, it's usually about this speed. I don't know what I'm allowed to sell. Well, all the guests that have come on here have sold products that are in about this price range, so I can do that. So taking that time ahead of time will give you the information you need to counter all of those fears and anxieties that are making it a struggle for you, so that you can just go forward confidently knowing that it's going to be okay, because you've already done all of the research and preparation in the beginning.
Maybe we should add a disclaimer here too, in that I know there are some of you out there who are like, I can just wing it. I mean, I'm used to doing this. I can just get up there and host a show, no problem. Or I could be a guest. I'm not worried about any of what people talking about. But the truth is, doing this kind of stuff ahead of time creates a better show for the audience. Even if you can just wing it, get this communication thing out of the way so that you make sure you're delivering the best product you can for your audience. So.
And even if you can just wing it, there are some people, not everyone, but there are some people who can just absolutely wing it and give a great interview. But it's a 2-person thing here. So it's not just about you. It's also about the other person that's going to be in the interview with you, and making sure that they have what they need and that they are confident to in order to give a really great interview. Because we're not just talking about good interviews, we're talking about great interviews today. And one of the biggest things that I can say, and we've kind of touched on a little bit here and there today, is don't be afraid of silence when you're doing interviews. And whether you're guesting or hosting, don't be afraid. I mean, if it's a live format like this, obviously you don't want to take 5 minutes to come up with your answer. But most podcasts are recorded ahead of time. And it's perfectly fine to just sit there in silence for 30 seconds as you're trying to come up with your answer. Or as you're trying to come up with the next question or whatever. It's way more important to sit there and be present in the moment, in the conversation, than it is to be worried about, oh, we got to fill the silence. Oh, it can't be quiet for more than 2 seconds. Oh my God.
We work with a lot of hosts that literally stop the interview, and say, okay, let's stop here for a minute, because I think what I'm going to talk about next is this. Are you okay if we go there? Or, go ahead. I mean, it is a conversation, and then you're going to create a great final product to hand off to your audience. So, don't be afraid to communicate what you need to communicate.
I will say, as a video editor myself, that it is much better for you to leave a couple seconds of complete silence than it is for someone to ask a question and you'd be like, so this is it, and go like that. It just makes it a lot harder to cut that part out. Whereas if you do just leave it silent, it may be a little more awkward in person, because you're like, oh, I'm just pausing the conversation. But as far as the editing process and making a good final product, just leaving silence there makes it so easy to just cut that section out. And then in the final product, it'll sound like you just had a normal conversation.
I'm laughing because there definitely are those people that just cannot leave an open space and they just keep going, yeah. And they use, their one word or their 2 or 3 words or their or whatever that they just repeat. Like it's just a part of their behavior that we can edit out 100 of them in one episode just because
Yeah.
the space and it's actually their brains trying to think of what's next. So they feel like their mouth has to be making noise anyway.
Yeah.
And that's another thing you can kind of talk about ahead of time and be like, hey, just letting you know. I know for me, I don't even know how many times I have told people I am a processor. You have to tell me something. It has to process in my brain for like 10 seconds, and then I can come up with an answer for you. So you can literally be like, hey, that's me. I'm a processor. So if I sit in silence for a couple seconds, nothing's wrong. Nothing, because there are definitely maybe even some people on this team that get frustrated with me when I sit in silence.
I know it's me. I do this to you, and we're having a conversation, and I'm just talking, and then I'm like, I didn't get a response. All right, I guess I need to say the next thing. I still didn't get a response.
Exactly, and I'm still trying to process the first thing. But that kind of thing can be communicated to the other person going to be doing the interview with you, and just be like, hey, so if I'm sitting in silence for a couple seconds, it's cool. If you need to take a couple seconds of silence to like figure something out, that's cool too. But yeah, definitely don't be afraid to just sit there for a second while you think of what you're going to say next, instead of feeling rushed to just get something out there, because that's going to lead to more thoughtful paths and down like to really interesting conversations.
Yeah.
All right. Really good stuff, Jenny.
Yep. That's all of my points to touch on. Anybody have anything else to say before we head out for the day?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
Have a beautiful weekend.
I do want to say all of these points that I pulled from today, we have pulled into a beautiful little document, and I will put the link for it down in the comments so y'all can check it out. It talks about preparing for an interview, what to do during an interview, and how to get ready after an interview to make sure that the show really goes well. So
yeah, it covers
a lot of effort into it.
It covers so much more than we had time to touch on today. I'll definitely get your hands on that. It's free, and I think it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely free.
Reading it,
links will be in the comments.
Reading it made me feel more comfortable about being on a show. Oh yeah, that's really good.
Yep.
So check that out down in the comments below, and I hope you guys have a great week.